Good evening once again, everyone. Buenas noches a todos. Welcome to tonight's special conversation on Cuban and Filipino women in revolutionary struggles. This webinar is actually the third installment of our conversation series, and we are excited that you are all joining us tonight. You can join us tonight. This webinar is also our act of solidarity with and felicitations to the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, Cuba's national organization on women and the largest women's organization in the world, which is celebrating its 60th anniversary today, August 23. This federation's founding president is Vilma Espin, who was a member of the Revolutionary National Action under Frank Pais that joined the July 25 movement in 1955. Vilma Espin also served the Second Eastern Front of the Rebel Army of the Cuban Revolution. And to note, the Cuban Revolution won on January 1, 1959. Tonight, we will look back on the significance of women in the Cuban Revolution, as significant as Fidel had said also that he referred to it as a revolution within the revolution. We will also highlight Filipino revolutionary women and their contributions and find out how both these origins progressed into today, including understanding them vis-a-vis a global context. But first off, we would like to continue and proceed to the opening remarks. I would like to call on Dr. Francisco Cadodong Nemenso, the president of PhilCuba and former president of the University of the Philippines. Cadodong.
Nakita na ako?
Opo.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of Cuba, I welcome you all to this webinar. But I was only told by my wife that I will be giving the opening remarks about 5 minutes ago. So I don't have a prepared speech. And, yeah, but it's important to consider the role that Filipino women played in the struggle. This can be divided into two parts. First, the hooks, then the NPA. I think there were more women were involved in the NPA than during the Hawk time. During the Hawk period, you can think of, I can think of only two women who were combatants. You have Dayang and Commander Liwaiwai. Most of the women who joined Hawks were staff members, couriers, cooks, and there were, however, commanders with feminine names, but were actually men, like Commander Linda Bia was a macho, and well, anyway, I'm here more to listen to you and to learn. And I don't think I have much to contribute.
Thank you so much, Cadodong. Thank you so much. That was so short a notice for you to to prepare for your opening remarks, but thank you pa rin. Thank you so much, Kadudong. We will proceed with topic 1, the role of women in the Cuban Revolution, the fight of women within the revolution, and how it is today. Our first speaker is the Secretary General of the Federation of Cuban Women, Teresa Amarelle Boué. However, due to scheduling conflicts, she cannot join us today and instead sent a video message. But unfortunately, the video message is in Spanish. We cannot possibly screen it tonight. So once again, we had our dear Ambassador Ibete Fernandez, who will summarize and give the synopsis of the message. Ambassador Ibete Fernandez is the Cuban Ambassador to Malaysia and non-resident Ambassador to the Philippines. She has been officially visiting the Philippines in 2017 and taking part in the activities of solidarity and friendship groups in the Philippines, and apart from fulfilling her diplomatic duties. Friends, let's welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Ibete Fernandez Hernandez. Ambassador.
Hi, good afternoon to all of you. It is a real pleasure to see you again today. First of all, I would like to thank you for having the opportunity to address all the participants regarding the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Federation of Women, which is commemorated today, and also to exchange with you information about the organization. As Gina explained to you, we have a message from the Secretary General of the organization. Unfortunately, the message is in English, but it was prepared to share with all the solidarity associations in the world that today are as us celebrating this day. In the message, I'm going to explain to you and to read to you most of the parts. The Secretary General of the organization, she's trying to explain how the organization was created, the objective, the challenges that the organization has, the achievement of the organization as well, the work that today the Federation of Cuban Women is doing.
Sel, nakamute ba ako?
Okay, thank you again, and I will start by saying that the Cuban Federation of Women, as it reads in his message, is around 20 minutes, the recording, but of course maybe mine will be less because I'm going to summarize just the main ideas for you to understand. The Cuban Federation of Women is a non-governmental organization that has constitutional support by the Article 14 of our Constitution. That Cuban Federation of Women has legislative and reform initiative. It means that it's represented at the Parliament of Cuba. The Cuban Federation of Women arose from the will of Cuban women at the triumph of the revolution that wanted to unite or reunite more than 200 women's organizations that existed in the country at the time. It means at the beginning of the revolution, there were around 200 organizations that represented women. So they decided to come together. And that idea was explained to Fidel by Vilma Espin, the president of the organization later on. And Fidel valued that initiative as very revolutionary because it happens at the time that the revolution triumphed. And this organization was officially inaugurated on August 23rd, 1959. Today, it is 60 years. The Federation of Cuban Women, it comes to synthesize all the efforts that the women in Cuba has done during all the struggle of the independence in the country. Why? Because Cuban women have been linked actively to all the independent struggles since the beginning in 1868. So the Federation of Cuban Women has two fundamental strengths. First is that all the women that belong to the organization. It means women with 14 years old, from 14 years old, who on their free will decided to join the organization. At the moment, at present, it has 91.7% of the female in the country are members of the organization. And the second strength that the organization has is in the way that they are organized, because Cuban Federation of Women is a force that works at the community level. It means at the more lower level in the society. They are 81,000 grassroots organizations at the community level and 14,000 blocks in the country. The blocks are the structure that is intermediate between the board of the organization and all the grassroots organizations. The objective of the Cuban Federation of Women is the defense of the revolution, because without it, the equality that exists today wouldn't have been achieved. Taking into account that the revolution proposed to eliminate discrimination against women. That's why the main objective is the defense of the revolution. Second one is the equality as a project of life. It's as a principle of the state that is included in the Constitution. It means Cuban women are equal to men. There is no discrimination. So what? One of the objective is defense equality. The other one is the education of the women. The other one, because family education in the culture of the equality. It doesn't matter that exist laws and public policies to support the equality of women, but women have to be educated. And that's why the organization has its strengths, because in the grassroots organization, there are 400,000 activists who voluntarily contribute to educate the women, because without education, teach them how to build and to work for all the objectives that the organization and the revolution has, is impossible. So education is one of the main objective of the organization. And the other one is to Cuban women are the beneficiaries and protagonists of the revolution, because the revolution contributed in rights and opportunities. Women contributed to it with their capacity of transformation and resistance. For Cuban women, the path traveled since the truth of the revolution have not been easy due to the impact of the blockade that constitutes the greatest violation of human rights towards the Cuban people. When we come to talk about the achievement of the organization, every time that there is an anniversary that is celebrated, it is necessary to do an assessment or a balance of the work that have been done in order to see what have been achieved, what need to be achieved, and how we can work in order to improve and to strengthen the organization. Also, figures are not everything, but figures said a lot about how Cuban women had advanced since the beginning of the revolution. Because before the revolution, even though there were all those 200 organizations that I told you, they were not, how can I say, they were not working together, and they were not a common approach to fight for the rights of the women. In Cuba, women have equal rights and opportunities like men. It is constitutionally endorsed from the state ends to articles that endorse it. Women have the right to do the same work and receive the same salary, to hold management positions, to education, to health, to share different public spaces under equal conditions. Maybe you can say, well, yes, they have equal rights, but we have to take into account that those rights have not been achieved in all the countries. So for us, it's an important achievement. Now I'm going to tell you how Cuban women are represented in numbers. That are the figures that I told you before. That maybe they are cold, but they said a lot about how Cuban women has advanced. For example, 49% of the women in Cuba represent 49% of the state workforce. 45% of decision-making positions in the country. 60% of the doctors of the country. 80% of the nurses of the country. 68% of technical and professional strengths of the country. 53.8% of staff working in science sector. 48% of scientists. 60.2% of university graduates. In Cuba, it has not been necessary to adopt quota laws in order to empower the women. The very process in which women work at the educational work and community life has allowed them to get that space. That's why that huge portion of representation of women in the Cuban society. 53.22% are parliamentarians. So we didn't need to adopt any law to allow women to go into parliament. They have been elected by their own merits. 47.6% of the state council is made of women. One of them is the vice president. Political and mass organizations are represented at the Council of State where the decisions are made. There is they are represented by the Cuban Federation of Women, by the Secretary General. Despite the above figures, we are not still satisfied since only we have 21% of ministers in cabinet, only 21% are women. It means represent only seven women. Although there is a large pool of women as deputy minister, which means 47%, who in the future can get the post of ministers. But it is important that the representation of women in parliament and all the decisions decision-making bodies, because it's there where the laws towards to reinforce the family is done. So women are there representing their interest and designing laws in order to support the women. There are also other professionals that were previously exercised by men and today in Cuba are performed by women. 80% of the prosecutors in the country are women. The Comptroller General of the Republic is a woman too. At the intermediate level, provincial level, there are 53% of governors and vice governors. They are women. They are responsible for deciding and directing the life in the country's territories. We believe that we have made progress in the following. That's the assessment that the Federation of Women has done. In the promotion of indicators In the promotion indicators, as the Secretary General of the organization explains, Raúl, the former president, said that women cannot have a setback in all the promotion that they have obtained during their life. So, as I mentioned to you, in the promotion indicators, they have been a progress. As you see, most of the women are represented at the bodies and the decision-making levels. We are also advanced in the sexual and reproductive rights that are decided by women, in guarantee 1 year of maternity leave for all working women, and in the establishment of daycare centers to take care and educate the children. It's not only to take care of the children, but also to educate it, because as I said before, one of the objectives of the organization is the equality of women in the society. And at those care centers, the children are teach in the are educated in the role in playing roles. It means to educate them for the future, in educate them to boys and girls to live together, to help them together, to respect the women. So that's the importance of the care centers, not to only take care of the children, but to educate them since they are small. But unfortunately, there are still challenges. For example, reduce the teenage pregnancy. Today is the rate is 50%. In that one, Cuban Federation of Women is working, but they have to do more, because as you see, the number is high, quite high. In reducing the aging of the population, in advance the division of the labor at home. In this sense, the Cuban Federation of Women is working hard in order to modify the family code that was approved in 1975. This is a work that they are doing at the moment in order to modify and to amend to have more for the roles and to works that women and men has to do are more equal, are more balanced in the houses. The Cuban Federation of Women reaches 60 years with achievement and challenges, being an unitary and genuine and authentically Cuban organization, because it is the result of the development of women. In addition to being unitary, it is heterogeneous, since there is no discrimination for its members by a school level, profession, race, sexual orientation, or gender identity. All those who want to be to belong to the organization have a space in the Federation of Cuban Women. The unitary vocation comes from the fighting tradition of the Cuban people. This 60th anniversary has been marked by the confrontation with the global pandemic of COVID-19, a disease that we didn't know, and in the case of the Cuban Federation of Women, has allowed it to consolidate it as an organization. Essentially, because the main work of the Cuban Federation of Women is prevention and social work. During the pandemic, the Cuban Federation of Women have been part of the temporary national group to face the virus. And in this capacity, its members have joined the research work in the communities to identify people with symptoms and people that are vulnerable in order to assist them. In the isolation centers, also the Cuban women organized under the Cuban Federation of Women have been taking part, because they have been established three times, 3 periods of work. So only frontliners cannot do. So the Women Federation have been also part of the cares of the centers, and they have been helping those frontliners to assist the people that are under isolation or vulnerable people too. Also, they have supported the massive vaccination campaigns in the country and in the task of preventing problems such as prostitution, teenage pregnancy, and drugs. 60 years after its creation, the Federation of Cuban Women ratifies the importance of having an organization that brings together women with convening power to support the task of the revolution and face any situation where they are needed. We think this is a message addressed especially to the solidarity from the Cuban Federation of Women. We thank all the sisters and friends from all continents for accompanying us during all these 60 years, in which we have transmitted our experiences, but also we have nurtured from the strengths of the organization of women outside our country and in the world. We are grateful that you have accompanied Cuba in the fight against blockade and in the permanent battle from the solidarity, brotherhood, integration, and we ask you to increase the denounce against that unjust policy that today acquires greater the dimension and is more aggressive. Almost all the weeks, new sanctions are established to intensify the blockade. The blockade is currently accompanied by campaigns to discredit the Cuban Revolution and distort the reality of our country. For example, the campaign against the Cuban doctors who only has taken life and health to other countries, even at the risk of their own lives, thanks to the humanist vocation and internationalist of our medicine. We call on our friends in the world to continue accompanying Cuba and fighting negative attitudes at the time when the world needs alternatives to defeat the pandemic and prevent it from continuing to spread. We ask you to trust in the Cuban Revolution and those Cuban women, because Cuba will continue to support social justice, solidarity, integration, and internationalism among the peoples of the world. That's the message that was sent by the Secretary General of the Cuban Federation of Women. As you know, 60th anniversary, at the beginning it was foreseen to do a big celebration, but because of the COVID-19 have been all downgraded. But anyway, there will be a commemoration in the country. Also at the moment, despite also the challenge of the COVID-19, that we had a setback because a lot of cases are arose again. There are a tropical storm that is also going through Cuba through the whole island, since one point to the other one. So this particular situation is being complicated, but anyway, they will find a moment to bring the message of the organization to the world, and also to reaffirm the commitment of the Women's Federation in continue defending the revolution and continue being together with government for the well-being of our people. That's the message of the Cuban Federation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Ibete, once again, thank you so much for your summary and articulations of the status of women in Cuba today. And it is very endearing to note that all the achievements of the Cuban women, their struggles, have given them the provisions assured in the Cuban Constitution, and showed also that one of the strongest foundations of the continuing Cuban Revolution was the revolution within a revolution, or the revolution that was started by the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. Before we proceed, I would like to greet some of our friends who joined us tonight. We have friends from Guam, from the University of Guam, Professor Lisa Natividad. Good evening, Ma'am and Professor, and thank you for joining us. Now we shall proceed to the video message from a young student who is the head of Cuba Student Solidarity and Friendship Group. Ms. Weng, if you could show us the video message from María Cardenas.
Since 1868, Cuban women have participated in one way or another on the different sides and conquests of our nation. She are considered with the rest of society. Even of a complex new context, the global epidemic SARS-CoV-2 over COVID-19, confrontation and prevention. Women carried out different tasks, inquiring utilization of cases with possible anticipated cases, research of new vaccines, and the preservation of human life on most real of our time. They represent 61% of personnel who collaborate with academic organizations in other parts of the world. And why they collaborate with the agricultural production and distribution of means of production. The Cuban Revolution had allowed to introduce to the state the economic, educational, legal, social, and labor world inequality conditions. Some are leaders, scientists, doctors, nurses, teachers, presenters, and others are farmers, students, economists, housewives, mothers, and wives. Even women are distinguished by their courage, gentleness, love, temperance, and self.
Ambassador, to our Ambassador Ibete Fernandez, please send our gratitude to María Cardenas for preparing the video. It is a fresh welcome and fresh development to see, or to see a glimpse of the young women in Cuba and how they are gaining from the sacrifices of the revolutionary women in Cuba before. Also, we would like to show you and give some space to the video message of our friend Miss Leima Freire Martínez, ICAP, the Solidarity and Friendship Group in Cuba. Leima Martínez Freire.
The cultural application for organizing this online event dedicated to the revolutionary struggle of the women, the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution this August 20th. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were commemorating the anniversary of the attack to the Moncada Lab.
Thank you.
Cuban They were also unfair towards the Cuban women. Only 2 women were involved in the assault led by Fidel Castro. These were Elba Hernandez and Teresa. However, the revolutionary motivations among women were inspired by the thought unfixable. They were a future in how to help providing the life of the family, or help as messengers or help some races. It was later they were chased by once in the Teresa Amarelle Boué, that women could really take up arms and be even together more distant. He then called a meeting of members of the Rebel Army for their reform to support the Eternal Commander. He knew that he would find opponents to make the politician because he thought that women had his capacity. Some of them. The guerrillas women wanted to exercise their right to be real combatants, and in response to this request, in September 1958, a 7-hour meeting between Fidel and his general staff, the Mariana Grajales Women's Platoon was created with 13 members. After the triumph of the revolution, there was a radical transformation of our political, social, and economic life, and women were gaining a more important role in the newborn society. There were a growing incorporation into the social and mass organization, and new jobs opportunity in different sectors. Women started to receive medical attention for free, free access to education, free childcare centers. In 1975, the new family law guaranteed the equal work, rights, and opportunities for all. We are proud to say today that the Cuban Women's Federation, our FNC, gathers more than 4 million Cuban women, and our participation in all sectors of the society, and also a growing number of decision-making positions are high. 67.2% of technicians and professionals are women. 81.9% of teachers and researchers are women. 53.2% of parliament members are women. And at ICAP, we represent the 60% of the staff, and a certain number in leading positions as an expression of the very same Cuban society. The departments in charge of the relations with North America, Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa and the Middle East, and Asia Pacific are all led by women. And the program delegations of ICAP, 7 out of 12 are led by talented and revolutionary. And our first vice president is also a woman. That the second person in charge of ICAP is one member of the Cuban Women's Federation. And also positions within the administrative body of ICAP are led by tireless women looking after the control of the limited resources that we can ensure their trust in the role and work of women. During these years, the Cuban women have gained and maintained their rights, implementing programs related to the sexual and reproductive life. We can say that the educational curriculum includes orientation on sexual and reproductive methods that includes girls and boys. The public messages protect the self-esteem of women, and also the educational programs for prevention and contraceptive methods are carried on in schools and other centers. Abortion is a right of the Cuban women. This provides the right to decide their own body and have all medical safety measures during the procedures. Casas de orientación a la mujer y la familia, the houses for orientation to women and families, guides and provides counseling to the family, including prevention work on gender violence. And in case of this violence,
The House provides counseling on how to face that situation and also legal and medical protection. The House also provides opportunities to help women get their independence from the economic point of view, providing them with jobs and providing other opportunities for women as courses and teaching lessons. Also, National Center for Sexual Education organizes different programs defending the rights of women, transgenders, LGBT community, and the diverse family concept that we have. The maternity program and maternity leave are guaranteed by the secure and constant appointments with doctors that during the pregnancy the women have. If the women have some medical problems, they can go also to the maternity homes where they receive specialized attention. And also the maternity leave provides women with 1 year of paid leave, and if it is necessary, another 3 months. Related to this maternity leave, I have to mention that it was expanded to other members of the family. First to the father, in order to continue the role of men in the responsibilities of the family. And also it was expanded to the grandparents. There are cases in which the mother receives a better salary or has a high position, and the couple decides to take care of the child during the maternity. And that person received the paid leave for that. The maternity also have been protected during this month of pandemic COVID-19, and mothers that have children in school are now in their houses in order to protect them and the family. Also during this month facing the pandemic, our women have made their own safety plan and have contributed to protect their family, workmates, and neighbors. Women have supported the communities by organizing the distribution of food and medical supplies to those who are at risk due to their ages or because they live alone or they have health conditions that put them in high risk. Women are at the center of the food production, contributing with their work and experience. They are also leading solidarity medical brigades in other countries.
When
Small group that the international organizations have selected as a group of experts to combat pandemic. The scientific community in Cuba recently announced that we have a candidate for a vaccine against COVID-19. We can proudly say that these women have been part of the team who designed, pursued, and tested on themselves to develop a product. Llaguno, that it is the name of this vaccine, will undergo a process of clinical health in our country to demonstrate their effectiveness. And as part of all the protocols that are undergo every time a vaccine is used, we reaffirm the views and strategies of our Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro, when stated that Cuban women are revolution within the revolution. With resilience facing and overcoming the difficulties imposed by the U.S. blockade, the revolutionary motivations of mothers, workers, artists, farmers, scientists, the teachers, and political leaders to develop our country are present every time. The strength and self-confidence to face the pandemic have been during this month with clear examples. The Asia Pacific Department of ICAP extends our congratulations to the FNC in these 60 years of intense work. And not so coincidentally, we are all women in our department. And we think that the best homage we can make to Mariana Grajales, the mother of our homeland, and to Vilma Espin, founder and president of honor of the Cuban Women Federation, is to never stop in the national and international battle to overcome the remaining obstacles in our society, towards the new generations of Cuban women to preserve the conquest achieved and have success in the many other tasks to come. Thanks to all of you for joining us in this celebration. Thank you for your solidarity. Thanks to the Philippine friends, but also I would like to take this opportunity to extend our thanks to the Asia Pacific region, where we have many friends and many women that are also struggling for their rights. Thanks for inviting us. It was a pleasure to participate with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Leima, for your message. The numbers have spoken. Actually, we've heard more than the 40% provided in the Philippine Constitution in terms of women participation in politics and everything. But in Cuba, it's way, way higher, 50% in politics, in education, in science, technology, medicine, and the maternity leave. My God, it's 1 year maternity, post-maternity leave. In the Philippines, the just approved law was 120 days. So look at the disparity between the two nations or the two countries. Ms. Leima Freire has joined us in the second installment of the Cuban conversation of the PhilCuba. She discussed and shared on the Moncada attack. So now we will proceed from Cuba. We will now travel back to the Philippines. We will proceed to the topic 2 of this conversation, the historical account of women in revolutionary struggles and the development of the women's movement in the Philippines today. So without further ado, our next speaker, Ms. Sonia P. Soto, is the Vice President of Kaisa Ka, a national federation of women's organizations formed in 1998. She is also an award-winning TV broadcaster and host of the award-winning public affairs show called So to Speak. Good evening, Ms. Sonia, and we are happy to have you in this conversation.
Good evening. Thank you, Gina. Good evening. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. And good morning to our sisters in Cuba and those in the other parts of the world. I'm grateful to the Philippine-Cuba Cultural and Friendship Association, PhilCuba, headed by Cado Dong Nemenso, our president, and Gina de la Cruz for inviting me to join this online conversation as a speaker. I am honored to be here with all these women who are making a difference in the world. It's an honor to be with my fellow speakers. We heard earlier on Ambassador Ibete Hernandez, who summarized the message of Teresa Amarelle Boué, the Secretary General of the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. Thank you very much for sharing the summary, the highlights of the message of Teresa Amarelle Boué to us. Dr. Jenny Llaguno is going to speak as well. Ms. Fe Mangahas and Ms. Judy Pasimio will be reacting, sharing their thoughts on what we've discussed so far. And Ana Maria Princess Nemenso, who I have not seen her for a long time, and I'm happy to see her here. Do you know that I am as old as the Federation? Yeah, I am 60 years old. And what a beautiful coincidence, isn't it? That we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, and I'm 60 years old.
Don't
And
look like you're 60.
60 años haciendo revolución sobre la marcha. I will be presenting today using a PowerPoint presentation, which I prepared for 5 days because I was tempted to use a new program. They call it Canva. It's an app that we use to design our presentations. I thought it will be wise to use it. So medyo nahirapan ako ng konti, but I want to show my output to all of you. You know, at my age, diba? Technologically challenged. So let me share with you what I've prepared so far. Ayan. Do you see it?
No.
Not yet. We're seeing the poster.
Yes. There.
Yeah, no, that's my presentation.
Okay.
Do you see
The
it?
three of you.
Yeah.
That's the start. Okay.
Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Medyo ayusin ko lang ng konti. Ha? Yeah, can you see it now?
Yes.
Mi presentación de hoy es sobre. The topics I'm going to cover in this discussion, in this presentation, consists of 4 parts. The status of women in the development of Philippine society to contextualize the current situation of women under Duterte, the women's movement in the Philippines, and Kaisa Ka and the Filipino women's aspiration for a socialist future. First of all, I'd like to thank my comrade here, Miel Laurinaria, for sharing some of her research with me. I was given only 20 minutes for this presentation, so this is a tough job you're giving me tonight. I am not going to discuss the entire history of the Philippines, so don't worry. I will only delve on the status of women during the various stages of development of Philippine society to put everything in proper perspective. So merong ano to, parang once upon a time, di ba? So once upon a time, in an archipelago composed of 7,100 islands not yet called the Philippines, there lived women whose status vis-a-vis the men differed depending on the type of their community. People in those times when society was semi-communal and semi-slave, the basis of community or unity was by blood, relations, or marriage. There were distinctions between classes at that time already. The royals were the Raha or the Maharlika, the Timawas, the middle class, and the Alipin were the slaves. The Muslim Sultanate was the highest form of societal organization reached before the coming of the Spanish conquistadores. Men and women, there was no surplus at that time. Production was for consumption. There was no surplus. They produced only what they needed to survive. Men and women alike were responsible for food production. They shared the household chores. They both took care of the kids, but even then, the women were the ones who primarily attended to the domestic domain. Childbirth was given premium. Women led religious rituals in the community. I remember Sister Mary Jan Manansan and Sister Aida Santos were the very first ones to to tell me about the story of the Baybaylans. They led religious rites while the men were engaged in military activities. And I think it is important to listen to this, no? For those women out there, women at the time were liberated when it came to their sexuality. Well, except for those with husbands. So hindi naman lahat liberated. Women royals in pre-colonial times enjoyed the same privileges as the men. Monogamy was already practiced, although having more than one spouse was allowed. There was no prostitution at that time. Okay. So, pumasok na yung Castilla. The Spanish conquistadores arrived in the 16th century. Of course, everything changed with the coming of the Spanish conquistadores, who conquered with their cross as well as with their sword. They established a colonial and feudal system. They domesticated the women. Their sexuality was controlled by the church. So let me talk about this book. Kasi ito tinuro sa eskwelahan, di ba? Noong araw. I don't know, some of you, anyway, 16 na ako, no? A book entitled Urbana and Felisa was published by the Spaniards. I remember when I was young, we were taught in school that in that book, women were instructed not to look directly at men's eyes if they meet them on the street or elsewhere. Women should look at the floor or their toes instead, and inside a church or elsewhere, but especially inside a church, women should not show an inch of their heels, sakong, because if they did, they will be tempting men to act maliciously towards them. That's the book Urbana and Felisa. And then, of course, after the Spaniards were defeated by the Americans in a mock battle at Manila Bay, at the time, the Filipino revolutionaries were on the eve of victory against the Spaniards. The Americans took over and an era of colonial and semi-feudal rule emerged. We all know that in such a setting where peasants were subjugated, women's oppression also intensified. They were paid less than men and were given to landlords to settle the peasant families' debts. I think this story resonates with Cuban women as well. The feudal patriarchal order was in place in Filipino homes. Women of the upper class, women of the upper class campaigned for literacy, suffrage, and morality versus public vice in those days, but they were still domesticated. They were only able to do these activities because they had the money and they had the maids. Meron silang mga kasambahay. Women professionals were still quite few in those days, except in the field of teaching. Kahit naman ngayon, di ba? There were many weavers at the time, mostly women, but most of them lost their jobs as a result of the decline of the weaving industry in favor of cheaper factory-made fabrics. American liberal education was already introduced, but the domestication of women was reinforced. Because of poverty and patriarchy, because of poverty and patriarchy, many Filipino women were forced or pushed into prostitution. In this, this is an old photo. This house is a licensed prostitution house in Sampaloc, Manila. So pumasok na yung mga Hapon. So Japanese occupation, we all know what happened. And we all know about the military sexual slavery by Japan in World War II. And this is a familiar face. On the left is Lola Rosa Henson, the very first comfort woman survivor to publicly come out to tell the world about her ordeal during those horrible years of Japanese occupation in the Philippines. I myself remember vividly how my very own mother, was only a child at that time, hated the Japanese. I remember when the Nuclear Free Coalition used to bring Japanese friends to Pampanga. My mother, who's you know, was not very fond of the Japanese because she couldn't forget what she saw when she was little. A Japanese soldier hit my grandmother's back with a bayonet. My grandmother died soon after that incident because she never recovered from that. Post-World War II period, we all know the Americans returned to rule again, but were forced to establish a puppet regime because of the war of liberation being waged by the Filipinos at that time. Okay, so the neo-colonial and semi-feudal period. From the very start, the Americans established their direct military presence in Southeast Asia for their forward deployment of military troops in the Asia-Pacific region. And women once again were the so-called collateral damage. They maintained the rest and recreation industry at the expense of women. Months before the Philippine Senate rejected the RPUS military bases agreement, and I remember this from you know, a book written, I think it's a research done by WEDPRO at the time, after the Basis Conversion Development Authority, I think, was organized. Ida wrote that in 1991, soon, just before the Pinatubo eruption and the RPUS military bases agreement rejection, there were about 65,000 prostituted women in Subic and Clark alone. Ameliorations in Central Luzon, according to that research, reached more than 200,000 by the time the Americans left Clark. Throughout the reign of the puppet regimes from Aguinaldo to Quezon to Ninoy Aquino, women remained exploited and oppressed as Filipinos, as a member of the exploited classes, and as women under patriarchy. Well, now, punta na tayo kay Duterte. And in 2016, Duterte, a self-proclaimed misogynist, the worst of his kind ever, came to power. This is a famous photo of him kissing an overseas Filipino worker who came to greet him during one of his state visits. I think this was in Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken. Was it in Hong Kong or Japan? I don't remember. This is the type of guy that makes you want to declare war against men, right? It cannot be denied that we have numerous laws protecting women. The PCW, which used to be the National Commission on the Role of Filipino Women, was established as early as January of 1975. The PCW continued to operate as a national machinery that ensures gender mainstreaming in governance, including the implementation of a gender development budget policy where at least 5% of the budget of local government units and line agencies of government should be utilized for the improvement of women's lives. According to a JICA study, there are still more men than women in agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. But while women in agriculture are engaged in all areas of rice production, they still couldn't own the land they till, even in situations where male farmers become legal possessors of the land. Thousands of women in agriculture end up as domestic helpers locally and abroad, while not a few of them become factory workers or entertainers. This situation is due largely to the fact that there are more unpaid female family members than unpaid male family members in agriculture. Let's go to labor force participation. So labor force participation rate among women is between 48 and 49%. But still, this is lower than men's participation in the labor force, considering that there are more women than men population-wise. And if we dissect this data, we will know that the data does not represent the number of women who are in full-time work. This is mainly due to the lack of employment opportunities for both male and female workers. From 1998 to 2016, more women than men end up abroad as OFWs because of the demand for domestic helpers. However, the study also says that the good news is that women have parity to men when it comes to senior management roles. But of course, we all know that senior management roles are very few. Now, I was listening to Ambassador Hernandez earlier. I think she said something like 67% of women are in politics, or 80%. The latest data is out of the 20,000 elective positions nationwide, there are only 3,852 women elected into public office, or 21.5%. So I think I missed several slides. Okay. This one is about women in education. This relatively women in education are in a better place. Of course, this is the turf of Dr. Jenny Llaguno. No? Females have higher participation rate in basic education. Cohort survival rate is also higher among females. Female students' completion rate in basic education is also higher than males. But of course, the problem here is the orientation and content of the education, right? Women scored better than men in national board exams. They excel in areas where men used to excel, and vice versa. More women are enrolled in graduate studies than men, and overall, the functional literacy among females is higher, except in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. Women in Mindanao are still at a disadvantage in terms of education, health, agriculture, labor, and so on, and they are the most affected by internal conflicts and other forms of violence. So in the field of health, Princess knows this subject better than I. She's been with woman health for the longest time, and she can share developments in this area with us. Of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, women are majority of the frontliners are women, and also women fall victims of abuse during the lockdown. And the intensification of violence against women during lockdown has been quite evident in research presented lately, even on television. So let me share with you, I saw something in the World Economic Forum. It says here, the Philippines is number 42nd in ranked 42nd in the health and survival gender gap category out of 149 countries. 12 years ago, the same forum, the World Economic Forum, stated that the Philippines was ranked number 1. That was 12 years ago. The projection in 2018, last year, the other year, that the economic opportunity gap will be closed in 202 years, has even worsened because in 2019, the World Economic Forum's projection is the economic opportunity gap is 257 years. So I have been reading up about the economic opportunity gap earlier. And in medyo, you know, we get it, right? When we say opportunity gap. Okay, now I think this is what interests you most. Filipino women's struggle for liberation or emancipation. Everything that I discussed earlier, I know most of you are already aware. You're very familiar with that. Most of you are in the women's movement. And we have our allies here, Dudong Menso. I saw Professor Roland Simbulan a while ago. Statistics and data such as those make us really angry and sad. So let's talk about positive things now. Let's be hopeful. Let's talk about women's struggles. The first significant action of women was the strike in 1816 by the cigarette makers or cigarreras. They went on strike because of the abuses of the cabecillas. We all know about the story of the 20 young women of Malolos who petitioned the colonial government that they wanted to learn Spanish, the language of their colonizers. Through their classes, though their classes in Spanish only lasted 3 months, the petition was radical enough at that time and actually bore positive results. More women were encouraged to disobey unreasonable orders by the clergy or the church. It made Rizal write his alternative view of women. Women supported and joined the Katipunan, and La Solidaridad was published. Filipino women participated in revolutions. I heard Kadudong talk about 2 revolutionary women who joined the Hukbalahap and the HMD. I think there is a discussion here later on that. In fact, some of these women became generals. We have the likes of course, Gabriela Silang, Teresa Magbanwa, Agid Kahabagan, Trinidad Texon, and Gregoria de Jesus, and a host of others. And in factories and shops where mostly women worked. The 1920s saw the growth of the suffragettes movement, where women demanded the right to vote. We all remember the name Pura Villanueva Calao, who led the suffragettes movement at that time. While the American generals running the country supported the women's rights, the right of suffrage at that time, this was not granted in the draft constitution in 1935. But through a plebiscite on April 30, 1937, the Filipino women won the right to vote. Okay. In yet another front, in the 1930s, women became part of the Communist Party. Women's membership in labor and farm unions increased. According to the secretary of the PKP, or the Communist Party, Secretary General Jesus Lava, said that at its peak, there were around 1,000 to 2,000 active female guerrillas. 1 in 10 guerrillas were female. Okay, let me share something with you here. This is the first time, you know, Miel Laurinaria shared this information with me, so I want to read it. It's about the Hook Rebellion. Vina A. Lanzona wrote a book. In her introduction of the book, The Amazons of the Hook Rebellion, published by the Ateneo de Manila University Press in 2010, ito yung sinabi. This is what was said. The Hook Rebellion was the most important peasant movement in Philippine history, the most successful resistance army in Asia during World War II, and the first communist rebellion defeated by the United States counterinsurgency operation. But the Hooks were important for another lesser-known reason. Theirs was the first major political and military organization in the country to include and actively recruit women. Women played a central role in the Huk Rebellion, and a significant number of Filipino women, mostly from peasant backgrounds, abandoned their traditional roles in Philippine society to participate in the struggle. So Kadudong mentioned Commander Liwayway and Commander Dayang-Dayang. Okay. However, the downside of this is, after the war, the Communist Party leaders had this to say about women. The most important underground activities that our women's movement can undertake to help the armed struggle are to train and recruit young women who can serve as first aiders, solicit contributions, office supplies, medicines, clothes, shoes, etc. for the armed forces, and act as intelligence agents and serve as couriers. There is, of course, nothing wrong with this per se. I will gladly do these chores for the movement, right? But when this becomes the rule and women are confined to these roles, women reserve the right to say, no way. Diba? Okay. Yeah. Let me quote again Lanzona, Vina Lanzona. She quoted Celia Mariano Pomeroy. And this is very interesting. In a chapter on under experiences as a guerrilla in the Philippines, this is what she said. In February 1950, the HMB held a big 2-week conference. You know what? This story of Celia Pomeroy resonates with many activists. Probably you've heard this story or you've experienced this yourselves. In February 1950, the HMB held a big 2-week conference in the Llaguno forest with leaders and the most dedicated cadres of the movement. 40 men with me as the only woman. We discussed the problems of the movement and decided on our task for the immediate future. On the last day of our meeting, comrades who wanted to raise any question not covered were given 10 minutes each to talk. I asked to be given half an hour to speak on the woman question. Somebody in the crowd asked, "What is the woman question?" I turned to the questioner and said, "I'm asking the chair to give me half an hour to speak so that I can explain to all of you the importance of the understanding of the woman question." So, syempre, medyo galit na siya. But the chairman conceded only 15 minutes to me. I spoke about the woman question, the problem of women's inequality with men, about women being considered inferior to men in all aspects of living. I pointed to examples of capable women active in our movement, who after being married to our male comrades became mere housekeepers. I cited cases of many women in our camps that were looked upon as just sex objects, not treated with the respect and dignity that they deserved. I said I was not proud of the fact that I was the only woman in that conference. It was no indication that women couldn't play an important role in the movement. It showed the failure of the movement's leaders to recognize that women deserve the same rights and opportunities as men. Okay. The anti-imperialist movement and the women's movement as well was at their ebb till the early 60s. But it's important to note that in the 70s, while women still continued to do welfare and charity work, women activists were preparing to form Makibaka. The formation of Makibaka was historic because of its revolutionary orientation. In the process of their involvement in these struggles, women are able to emancipate themselves no matter how slow and painstaking this may be. Their struggle for reforms forced the elite to grant them concessions. I will attempt to summarize the history of the women's movement into 3 categories. These are, of course, not my original ideas, but the product of summing up conferences I've attended in the past 30 years or so. As you can see, I'm already a senior citizen. Kaya medyo matagal-tagal na rin yan. The first and most significant is their uninterrupted participation in the revolution from the Spanish colonial period to the present. Hindi huminto. Women did not stop. Women continued to wage armed revolution. They did not give up. The second is their struggle for political and economic reforms. Most noteworthy of this is the suffragettes movement in the 1920s and 30s and their struggle to topple down the Marcos dictatorship in the 70s and 80s. Numerous women's organizations were established during this period. We had Kalayaan, WOM, Gabriela, to name a few. The third, of course, is their continuing fight for their welfare, those of their children, the elderly, those with disabilities in detention centers, among others. Wait. And another significant development to keep in mind is how in the 80s and 90s, and even up to now, when I recall this, of course, I become very sad and nostalgic as well. Bourgeois ideas and concepts proliferated and influenced many women's organizations through various international and local campaigns as part of the continuing imperialist and patriarchal offensive on feminism. Of course, this was happening against a backdrop of major ideological debates, both internationally and locally. It is during this period that women in my own circle back then in Central Luzon decided to reflect, rethink, reorient, start anew, and carry on, but never stop. In 1998, we founded Kaisa Ka, a federation of women with national and democratic orientation and a clear socialist perspective. It's been 22 years since we've gathered and said we cannot give up on socialism, as this is the only route towards the liberation of women. Our foundational belief then and now, the Filipino women cannot fight the battle alone. They have to wage a revolutionary movement side by side with the men belonging to the exploited classes in order to dismantle the neo-colonial. The women's movement is necessarily class-based. It cannot be divorced from classes. And the men are not our enemies. We have to fight side by side with them, especially those belonging to the exploited classes, the workers, the peasants, the middle class, and so on. We have to fight imperialism, topple down the ruling elite, even as we fight unrelentlessly our own battle against patriarchy. To liberate ourselves, we have to draw inspiration and strength from those who have succeeded before us, and those who continue to tread the socialist path to dismantle patriarchy. And as our Cuban sisters say, they are waging a revolution within a revolution. Let me read this very important quote from Vilma Espin, the founder of the Federation of Cuban Women. Sin las mujeres no hay revolución. Without women, there is no revolution. Let me close by saying, as long as women are not free, the people are not free. Muchas gracias. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Sonia, Miss Sonia Soto, dear friends. Thank you so much. It's like reading once again the Renato Constantino's Past Revisited, and then moving forward to the gains, to the participation of women in revolutionary struggles. It is indeed sad to note that even with the numerous battles that women fought, until today we are still struggling. Until today we are still amid these women issues and women emancipation question. Thank you so much for giving us the sense of connection to Filipino women who consciously participated in different periods of revolutionary struggles, from the Spanish colonial period to the Philippine-American War, the Japanese occupation, the anti-dictatorship struggles, and until the Duterte administration. Maraming salamat, Ms. Sonia. Now, we would like to hear, we move forward to topic 3, how the women's movements in Cuba and Philippines are situated into the current global context. We will be hearing from our speaker, last speaker, Dr. Jenny Romero Llaguno, a creative and technical writer and a women's rights advocate and activist. She has been engaged for the last 29 years in women's movement and other revolutionary endeavors. She is also a member of the PhilCuba's technical working group. Good evening and welcome, Ms. Jenny Llaguno. You have the floor, ma'am. Spanish colonial period to the Philippine-American War, the Japanese occupation, the anti-dictatorship struggles, and until the Duterte administration. Maraming salamat, Ms. Sonia. Now, we would like to hear, we move forward to topic 3, how the women's movements in Cuba and Philippines are situated into the current global context. We will be hearing from our speaker, last speaker, Dr. Jenny Romero Llaguno, a creative and technical writer and a women's rights advocate and activist. She has been engaged for the last 29 years in women's movement and other revolutionary endeavors. She is also a member of the PhilCuba's technical working group. Good evening and welcome, Ms. Jenny Llaguno. You have the floor, ma'am.
Okay, from the top. Buenas noches, Dr. Nimenso, Ambassador Ibete, and all the participants of this conversation tonight. For our topic today, Cuban and Filipino women in revolutionary struggles, I'm here to provide the current global context and to situate the women's movement in Cuba and the Philippines. Global context refers to the finance, capitalist, hegemonic world order, now dominated by the West, with the US at the top. Global context also refers to the state of disruptive technology that currently rules the world. As we moved into the 20th century, we arrived with a very clearly prescribed way that males and females in marriage are to behave with one another. A new era has since dawned. The climate of relationships had changed, and women were no longer willing to be submissive. The end of the dominant submissive model in relationships was in sight. The change from the dismissive model to one of equality is a monumental shift. We are learning how a relationship based on genuine feelings of equality can operate equally, can operate practically. Given this context, what is the status of women in a little-known country like Cuba, which succeeded in its revolutionary struggle 60 years ago, beginning with the Moncada Revolt, and which finally took hold in 2002, when it ousted the then dictator, Fulgencio Batista. What is the status of women in a third world country like the Philippines as it continues its unfinished revolution? Cuba, as we have heard from Ambassador Ibete and our other Cuban sisters, has taken great strides towards raising the status of Cuban women through its literary campaigns, agrarian reform, longer maternity leave, health protection, equal wages vis-a-vis the men, participation in parliament, increased number of professionals, and the enactment of policies from a women's perspective with the passing of gender equality-driven policies. The Philippines, for its part, across its prehistory and history of more than 5 centuries, from the Babaylan to its women warriors in the fight for freedom against Spanish and American colonizers, along with the non-armed conflict for the women's vote in the early 20th century, the guerrilla fighters against the Japanese in World War II, and the underground fighters during the martial law period, and the ongoing guerrilla work in the hills. What followed in the post-dictatorship was intensive organizing that generated the establishment of women's studies programs in academia and legislation in Congress to arrest casual systemic sexism ingrained in our society. Where are they now in the context of the current globalization, which is in crisis and is accompanying disruptive technology? The consensus is that the women's movement is now in a context of intersectionality, where gender alone or patriarchy cannot account for inequalities in society, because gender cuts across compounding experiences of discrimination, such as, for the major part, class, race, sex, ethnicity, religion, age, and sexual orientation, etc., where the feminization of poverty ought to be considered, where being Black or brown is a factor, where being an Arab or coming from a tribe ought to count, where being Muslim or Christian determines one's feminism, where being elderly is the reason behind being patronized, where being soji or cis or lesbian or gay or transgender ought to play out on the matter of gender. Intersectional feminism, a term coined by a Black American named Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, thus provides a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of equality often operate together and exacerbate each other. For the purpose of situating the success of the revolution and the status of women in Cuba in the framework of intersectionality, I will posit that the success lies in the social construction of Cubans within a socialist regime. While this is not foolproof, and admittedly, there's a raging debate between nurture and nature, I still hew to the truth of how a country's citizens will be raised in accordance to their parents' political orientation. When you grow up in a nearly classless society, where there is no wide gap among social classes, and distribution of income is not skewed in favor of a clique that is exceedingly wealthy, where opportunities are open for your education and getting educated guarantees employment, where women and children are protected by state policies, then there is the fair chance that you will be in step with your government, supporting its revolutionary principles vis-a-vis dominated supporting its revolutionary principles vis-a-vis one dominated by the capitalist doctrine of free trade in a profit and capitalist-driven world. Surely, Cuba is severely punished with the ongoing trade blockade, but its people support the struggle to campaign for the lifting of such sanctions. Thus, the women's movement in Cuba operate on the principle of equality of social class that intersects with gender. It's inclusive of women who may be in danger of being poor, thus taking care of basic needs like food, shelter, employment, optimized health, social security, as well as a quality of life that is in solidarity with their sisters in progressive movements throughout the globe. In the case of young people trying to overcome the blockade, according to Leima Freire, Director for Asia Pacific of ICAP, it is a daily fight on different fronts. There are pictures to follow in their Facebook page of the voluntary work that they have been doing following the program initiated by Che Guevara, also the program that Fidel envisioned. Education for all, health for all, land of their own, houses of their own, without having to pay rent. Thus, we see that the young generation in Cuba, men and women, also deploy technologies and the social media, but their use of it is more focused on advancing the revolution that Fidel Castro continued along the ideals that Jose Marti espoused. What about the Philippines? The women's movement in this country seems to be active in mainstreaming many gender equality programs, both in the public and the private sectors. Men are just too careful nowadays not to be sexist. They raise consciousness woke to being accused of sexual harassment, trying hard to be politically correct in their language and their actions in terms of not discriminating against women. Of course, there are still reports of violence against women, but there are more institutions that will with these cases. Legislation has helped aplenty in the fact that it's no longer a private assault, can no longer be hidden behind the veil of secrecy. Violence against women can be a public concern that can be confronted with a citizen's arrest. Rape is now classified as a criminal act. There's still much to be desired, but steps are in place. Of course, our organized women still go by trends in the US, where there is a Me Too movement, we too have one. Where there is a billion rising, we too have that. But also we also have the Babae Ako movement, spearheaded by the left-leaning Gabriela. I have not heard of any feminist speak of intersectionality, though the concept has long been a subject of discourse in many fora. In my time with the Center for Women's Studies, we had already talked about the intersections of gender with social classes in terms of the feminization of poverty. The raging issue at the moment is how gender intersects with social orientation and gender identity and expression. It's not enough to rally against the discrimination against women, but women as well as men must recognize other genders such as lesbians, gays, transgender, as much as heterosexuals to have equal rights. Partnership is the accepted mode of relationship, whether homosexual or otherwise. Race is another point of intersection. In Chikbeho is no longer acceptable. Islam and Muslim communities are also where points of intersection occur. It is the reason we now celebrate Muslim holidays. Our elderly is protected by the Senior Citizens Act, and they receive some privileges, including myself.
Including me.
The question is not as much for gender equality as it is for achieving genuine independence as a nation. Why has the revolutionary struggle not completely succeeded in our country, referred to by one of our nobles as the sad republic? This is another topic, I guess. It calls for a comparative study of Cuba and the Philippines, drawbacks as well as benefits. Meanwhile, we continue not merely on the level of research and studies, but in political action, in community organization, in people's mobilization towards a society that closes the gap among social classes, that redistributes resources and wealth equitably, that opens opportunities for one and all. We continue to have aspirations of being anti-imperialist, of having ideological convictions dedicated to the struggle of our peoples for freedom and sovereignty, against hegemonic attempts, warning against the proliferation of nuclear warfare and interventionism, calling for the self-determination of our peoples in a world without wars and without sanctions, a world where peace reigns with the leadership of women and men, building peace and socialism towards a victorious Philippines. Maraming salamat po. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Jenny. Thank you so much for a very insightful global context of the women's movement and bringing to the discussion the intersectionality of the women's struggles to analyze the two countries under the similar social modalities. I would also say that Jenny's discussion may warrant a part 2 of a conversation related to modern times violations of women, but are still deeply rooted and connected with class emancipation and political freedom. Thank you once again, Jenny. Now let's move forward to listen to our two reactors. The first panel of reactor is Ms. Fe Mangahas, a historian, feminist, and cultural worker. She is a fellow of the Institute for Studies of Asian Church and Culture, or ICAP, for short, a former commissioner of the Philippine Commission on Women and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Good evening, Ms. Fe. Please, you have the floor.
Good evening. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Since I have 7 minutes, I am very overwhelmed by our speakers, si Sonia, si Jenny, and our sisters from Cuba. Comparing the two, I cannot compare kasi Cuba is just an island. Tayo 7,100 islands. And ang population natin is such a big population scattered in so many islands. And we have had 3 colonizers, Spanish, American, Japanese, and the globalization impact on our society. We must really admit that we have really a very complex and difficult situation, not only in terms of national liberation, but women's liberation. And sila Princess, we were together in this during martial law. And there was a time when during martial law, kami nila Aida sa Kalayaan, we were debating, ano ba uunahin namin, yung aming women o yung aming national liberation? And kasi nakaka-experience na rin ang mga women activists within the movement of sexism, you know, and kung may mga nare-rape noon, women victims of rape, parang side issue lang yon during the martial law period. Parang cannot be talked about and cannot be part of the major issues of the day. Ganun, it also happened during the time of the Katipunan. Remember yung nangyari kay Oryang? Si Oryang brought her case of sexual assault or rape ba yun to the court, and Bonifacio pleaded, and it was totally ignored during the hearing of the Katipunan. Yung mga ganon. We still have problems talaga, but we have many gains at the same time. Natuwa din ako dun sa mga narratives ni Jenny and Sonia. If you paid attention, may mga gains tayo. We have many laws. Kaya lang yung implementation, di ba? And kung organizations naman, we are organized, marami rin. And then kung ano naman, no, role natin sa politics, we have had 2 women presidents na hindi naman feminist, of course, pero at least we had 2 women presidents. And may mga senators, women senators tayo, etc. And the women issues, as far as the movement is concerned today, nandiyan na yan. Equal na to our struggle in class, in ethnicity, in what else? Gender, nandiyan na. LGBT, nandiyan na. It's being struggled already there. I think we have covered the issues of women sufficiently. But you know, yung actuality, Jenny is so correct and Sonia is so correct. Talagang yung realities, meron pa rin. But maybe we really have moved forward from the beginning. Tingnan mo yung nangyari kay Celia Pomeroy. That's really an opener to me. Huh? It can't happen anymore today within the movement. However, where do we draw our real strength? Yan pa yung tanong ko lagi. Are we just going to borrow from abroad? Don't we have something of our own that we can build on and integrate feminism that we have learned from the West, from Europe, from whatever? Kasi kami nila Jenny, we came up with a book on babaylan feminism. Jenny, you remember that? Centennial Crossings and all that.
Yes.
Nakita ko.
Yes, I remember.
Nakita ko doon na, ito pa when I was in the Historical Commission, I asked that a women's history be written, kahit na it will take ages. Wala pa tayong history of women, by the way. Nobody has attempted, but it should be done already. History at saka kasama yung women's movement. But we don't have one. Kaya talbog-talbog yung narratives natin. Hindi natin
Gawin mo na.
Ay, hindi pwedeng isang tao yan. It has to be done. Princess, you're there. Sila Sonia. Everybody who's hearing me now, we should be doing that. And yun nga. So I was thinking, if we go back to the babaylan tradition, there is something there. From the beginning of time in our history, women was one of the major leaders in our society. We had the Datu, the Panday, and the Bagani. The Datu was the political and in charge of politics and economy. The Panday was for the technology, and the Bagani was for defense, yung warrior. But you know, the babaylan functioned in a very, very interesting manner. She was priest, priest, spiritual leader connecting heaven and earth. Yung ganyang kalalim na kaalaman. Then she was a healer. Hindi doctor, kasi yung doctor ngayon, alam mo na, espesyalista, ganyan. This is a holistic medicine. Hindi lang physical, kasama ang emotional, kasama ang spiritual, psychological. So ibang klaseng doktor. Kaya ngayon hirap na hirap tayo sa COVID eh. Ang doktor natin hiwa-hiwalay yung kaalaman. Samantalang nangangailangan ng holistic approach din. O isa pa, yung guru na rin because as babaylan, she was the keeper of the memory of the tribes, epic chanter, memory, the history, the values of the barangay, of the community. Very communal. Very communal. Kasi kung minsan, my impression is, although I'm not against it, I'm a feminist babaylan feminist, if we transplant ideas simply from the West, which is because of their context, they had to be more individualistic and more assertive. Pag yan ang dinala natin dito, I think we are forgetting to use the culture which was like the babaylan, more healing, more holistic, more, what's this? Parang hindi masyadong, hindi aggressive, pero more effective because it is very cultural to us, very cultural to us. So yun lang siguro yung maiaambag ko tonight na I thank Sonia. She did very well running through the whole gamut of such a long history, and the same with Jenny, putting us in the global context of the present, which makes our struggle more complex. And really, really, kudos, congratulations to Cuba, to the women of Cuba for their success. It's really amazing, and we really should look up to them in terms of organization and whatever. But machismo, patriarchy is still here for all of us to deal with. So I have only this to say for now. Sana I invite everybody to a project on history of women and the women's movement. So maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Ms. Fe Mangahas. We have here our next reactor, Ms. Judy Pasino, from the perspective of the IP women. We have Ms. Judy Pasino from the LILAC, or Purple Organization of Women. You have now the floor, please, Ms. Judy.
Good evening po. Buenas noches. It's an honor to be part of this conversation with strong women leaders from Cuba and of course here in the Philippines. Thank you for the presentation of Ms. Jenny Llaguno, Ms. Sonia Soto, and even the reaction of Ms. Fe Mangahas. So many points already that I'm really looking forward to the next feminist conversation, and I hope I will be invited again. In our pre-colonial times, and this has already been mentioned, so I'll be very short, indigenous societies had high regard for indigenous women. As babaylan, women had critical role in the indigenous society as spiritual leaders, healers, ritualists, food producers, life givers. But as we know, colonialism has destroyed this as they invaded our islands with Christianism, demonizing indigenous beliefs along with the spiritual leaders. Nakwento nga, with the Spanish colonialism, Maria Clara was created, the Filipina with long black hair, prim and proper, well covered with layers of clothing, and trained to have limited skills and knowledge. Thus, the woman was a leader, a food grower, a land worker, a fighter, are considered aberration at the time of a woman. Their families and their communities were considered indios, savages. Discrimination against indigenous peoples have taken root so deeply by our colonizers that it is still very present to this day. But they have fought, and they have fought hard. That is why the indigenous peoples, according to Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, refer to a group of people or homogeneous societies who have continuously lived as organized community on communally bounded and defined territory through resistance to political, social, and cultural inroads of colonization. Unfortunately, our historical accounts seldom mention and recognize the role of indigenous communities, let alone indigenous women in our movements of resistance. I was wondering, kasama ba ang katutubong kababaihan sa Hook Rebellion? Si Commander Liwayway, si Commander Dayang-Dayang, who have been mentioned, they're from Pampanga, but are there indigenous women? And I'm sure there are, but yeah, they are not recognized. Today, colonization of ancestral territories are still happening by the Philippine state and by multinational corporations. State discrimination and acts of violence are continuously being experienced by the indigenous peoples. Systematic land grabbing through large-scale mining, plantations, corporate plantations, mega dams, which means destruction of their food sources and the natural resources which sustain their cultural beliefs and practices. This is still the very context that indigenous peoples are still in. So thank you, Ms. Jenny Llaguno, expounding on intersectionality, because through all these challenging contexts, the indigenous women, them being indigenous and also being women, experience multiple layers of discrimination and violence from the state and unfortunately still within their communities. Their leadership is being undermined, their participation in decision-making processes are sidelined, their role in food production remains unrecognized, and their care work for the family and their community exploited. Through the struggles of the IP movements and IPRA, there are positive policy changes. For example, the free prior informed consent. This is the safeguard that has been put in so that no development projects or activities by the state or by corporations can come in without the consent of the indigenous peoples. However, indigenous women have very little participation, if any, in the process of getting or of giving the consent. Ms. Soto talked about women in political spaces. With IP law, representation in the different local government units has been allocated for the IPs, and that's good. But most often than not, the communities would choose a male leader for their representative. In the 2015 data of the National Commission of Indigenous Peoples, there were 467 women out of 2,782 representatives, or around 17%. For the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, which governs the new Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao until 2022, there are 75 seats in the parliament. Out of the current composition, 12 women have been appointed. None of them is a non-Moro indigenous woman. There is one seat reserved for one non-Moro indigenous person, and this has, of course, been given to a male. While there is growing recognition of indigenous women's leadership and role in the community, it is still a struggle for them to be part of the official decision-making process or structures. This is the same with the indigenous political structure, where women play crucial roles in mediation, peace building, health, protection of the environment, and food production. Moreover, even as the IPRA and the Magna Carta of Women recognize indigenous knowledge, systems, and practices, there are state policies which are discriminatory against these, one of which is the banning and criminalization of home births. Indigenous women and their paltera, pandaitian, or indigenous birth attendants are being fined and threatened to be arrested if they are found to be giving birth at home or assisting home births. So this, plus their roles as food producers, seed keepers, and ritualists, are all now in danger as their land and natural resources are being destroyed, all for profit. Amidst all these, indigenous women, time and again, occupy the front lines of assertion of their rights to land and their communities' right to self-determination. You know, the People's Barricade Against Mining in Barangay Didipio, these are manned mostly by Tuwali women. In Tampakan, South Cotabato, the Balaan women are also in the front line. Even in the Megadang in Kaliwa, along Sierra Madre, the Dumagat women are in the front line against this. Even during the pandemic, indigenous women are the first responders in providing relief to their families and communities. Our experience in Lilac through our Babayanihan, it's our women-to-women solidarity in response to COVID-19. They bravely face the risk of COVID-19 and also the militarist response of the Duterte government with all the checkpoints. The indigenous women were there to purchase, pack, and distribute relief goods and hygiene kits to women. And because they assert, the women have earned the ire of the misogynists who are in power, led by, of course, President Duterte, the state forces, the security guards of greedy corporations, and even community members. They have been tagged as rebels themselves or assisting them. This is the case very recently with indigenous women who are distributing the relief goods, which we were able to solicit. They went to communities deep in the forests or high in the mountains, areas which the government won't or cannot reach. But they are harassed by the military, accusing them of supplying goods to the rebels. There are also stories of violence by their husbands, believing that as women, they should spend more time as wife and mothers and less time being an activist, a leader, a resistor. According to Global Witness, an international human rights monitoring group, Philippines is the most dangerous place for land rights defenders. A big percentage of the land rights activists killed in 2019 are indigenous peoples. But because of the various factors affecting the data gathering, even by official bodies such as the Commission on Human Rights, numbers of killed, disappeared, and harassed among indigenous peoples are underreported, but more so of indigenous women. Even the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, Vicky Corpus, in 2015 reported that statistics on violence committed against indigenous women remain unreliable and incomplete. While statistics do exist, are believed to vastly underestimate the true number of murders and disappearances of indigenous women around the world. Indigenous women are disproportionately affected by violence and discrimination because of their intersectional identities that make them more vulnerable than other groups in society. But like the women from Cuba, indigenous women continue to assert their rights. They are forming local women's organizations, and young indigenous women are actively participating. They're slowly occupying leadership positions in their indigenous political structure and even in broad national groups. But their voice are still muted and are often drowned as we women discuss and seek solutions for and advocate against women's oppression and violence against women. Earlier, we talked about the women's question, but given their intersectionality of identities, as Ms. Llaguno pointed out, being part of the rural communities, poor, and indigenous, is our women's question exactly the same with theirs? So the challenge that we pose now, we need to break the isolation, invisibility, and marginalization of indigenous women, not just in her story or in the struggle, stories of our struggles, but even within our movements now. But more so, of course, in the state responses. We should seek accountability for state neglect, which historically has been making indigenous women increasingly vulnerable in the current context of the corporate-led development paradigm. The women's movements must continue to be mindful and proactive in seeking the stories and voices of the vulnerable, in this case, indigenous women, but also the lesbians, trans, and other gender identities, and create more spaces for them to be their own voice, to tell their own stories, to inspire us with their struggles and victories, and with them together, co-create a better society for all of us. And we draw inspiration, of course, from the inclusive, non-discriminatory, and persistent organizing of our sisters in Cuba. The call for a revolution within a revolution rings so true with our indigenous women sisters. Viva la Federación de Mujeres Cubanas, mabuhay ang mga kababaihan saan mang panig ng ating mundo. Magandang gabi sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat, Judy. Viva! Mabuhay ang kababaihan. Thank you so much for completing the landscape. Thank you so much for the very vibrant and powerful presentation on the situation of indigenous women, especially vis-a-vis their struggle on self-determination, the current aggression, development aggression, the current violence amid the advance of capitalist society, advance of capital miners, etc. The IP women are in the middle of such kind of violence. So we thank you. We cannot thank you enough for bringing this to the fore. And also thank you for mentioning the Bangsamoro women. We could have invited, that's what one we missed out on, inviting one woman from Mindanao, but I'm sure they are well represented from the presentations of all our speakers. Do we have a very urgent question from the chat box, Ms. Weng, or a very strong reaction from Facebook, Ms. Fe, that we can discuss or we have to discuss?
We don't have question from the chat box.
Yes, hello, good evening po. I had an elaboration of my question because in the spirit of international solidarity, I'm very interested to know if you are encountering, how do you call it? Mismatch of ideological and social cultural makeup and practices with regards to women revolutionaries. So I'm pertaining to, my question would rather be, could you share, Ambassador Fernandez, on the very practical setup in Cuba on how are women revolutionaries able to break from the imprisonment of patriarchal relations and practices, especially among sexual, emotional relations? Even so, from the point of view of the Filipino women, we are yet to achieve our social revolution. The particular context, Ambassador, is that I have a lot of women comrades who seem to have polarized views on the matter of my question. One mindset is the needing to get by with the social system that still dictates women as second to men. And on the other hand, women revolutionaries who are struggling in practice against women oppression on their social roles in the current social setup are said to be, they would end up alone and is not able to have a family of their own. Could you say something about this?
Yeah.
Yes, well, as I said at the beginning, the belonging to the National Federation of Women in Cuba is voluntarily. It doesn't matter what your ideology is, or what your sexual orientation is, or your gender identity. It doesn't matter that, how can I say? The Federation of Women works at the community level with the purpose of prevention and education. And if there is ideological differences or not, it doesn't matter. The people that are working as activists, if they have to do any work related to education or prevention or vaccination or whatever work they are doing, it doesn't matter if you are with the revolution or not. At the end of the day, you are living in the community, and the work that the Federation is doing is to help the people living there. Regarding the the family, the formation of family, as you were talking, you mean it in the way of different sexual orientation or something like that? Yes, we in the new constitution that we approved a few months ago, one of the more debated articles was related to the marriage among the same sex and the possibility, of course, of having a family. Most of the people were trying to integrate those people that have different sexual orientation to the society by allowing them to have their particular article in the constitution. But some said, well, we are not ready for it yet. But we found like consensus in giving them the right to have a family among the marriage among two people. We never say different sex or same sex. We never say that. Marriage is formed by two people on their consensus. So it gives them a space in the society to have their family. Of course, when you go to adoption and all those things, what you need to, of course, the people that has to do with it take care of that the people that are adopting, they have the conditions to raise that child. Because as I told you before, since the centers for taking care of the children, is not only taking care, but also educate them. You see, if the children goes there to those centers, they learn to play roles and to know the difference or how they need to behave in the society in the future. If they have to help in the house, if they have to respect the women, I mean, education is there. It doesn't matter if the parents are same sex, but they are going to be taught and how to behave in the society, even though you have the influence of the house. But people that has the condition, of course, they can adopt children, and of course, they can marry and form a family. The complexity of the topic is there because, of course, we are coming for a machist society, and sometimes we are not as I said before, people are not ready for marriage of the same sex. But even though we need them to create a space, we cannot discriminate people because of that, because the Constitution is going to give the right to everybody on the same, without discrimination. It doesn't matter.
Okay, Ambassador. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I hope the question has been answered, Ms. M. Probably we can elaborate on that on future discussions with various women's organizations. Of course, the Socialist Ideology Foundation should be translated in every form and in every themes of the struggle. Okay, so before the photo op, can we have the closing remarks from our dear Princess Nimenso, the National Coordinator of Women Health and one of the movers and member of the PhilCuba Technical Working Group, Ana Maria Princess Nimenso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good evening, Princess.
Good evening, yes. This has been an interesting discussion, comparing the process of, the experience of the Cuban and the Filipino women in revolutionary struggles. But I think while the circumstances may be different, because in the case of Cuba, the women participated in a revolution that really, in a sense, changed the system. Okay, whereas in the case of the Philippines, we are still we are still continuing a revolution, but it's an ongoing one, and it has not involved a thoroughgoing revolutionary change. But I think what has been highlighted is that even in Cuba, that has already won its revolution, still in a capitalist system, the revolution and struggle continues. And I think this is something that we should keep in mind. Nothing is perfect. There's always a goal to achieve. And but it's so important, I think, to really think that even as we move along and we are able to get laws, it has already been said that we have good laws in the Philippines, but it has not been implemented. And it is because we can continue to all these reforms, all these advances of women, but unless you're able to see where the economic, because the poverty situation is a very significant, it's a very basic factor that can influence also the conditions of lives of women. So I just want to point out that in the 1970s, well, as I said, the women's struggle continues, but it was only in the 1970s that related, the women's struggle within a social system. And it was in that sense at that time when they saw the need to overhaul, the economic social system. And I think this is something that we haven't done yet. Cuba has done it, but the revolution continues for the women. We continue to struggle for full women's freedom. So I think that's the most important, that whether we are in a capitalist or in a socialist society. So thank you very much for all those who participated in this online conversation. Thank you to all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please, my request Thank you, everyone. Once again, congratulations to the Federación de Mujeres Cubanas. Always an inspiration to the Philippine women's struggle and always an inspiration to all of us. That small island in the Caribbean. May I request everyone to please open your videos so
Gina?
that we can see you.
Gina,
Yes.
just a second. For those of you who would like to save the chat, you can just click the 3 dots in the lowest part of the chat. So you can save everything that's there if you would like to. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Cora. That's our webinar host, Ms. Cora Fabros. For the last time, can we have the technical team would like to have our photos?
Okay, everyone ready? Smile. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Maraming
Only a few
salamat.
men came.
Judy, Miss Judy Pasimio, Miss Sonia Soto, Ambassador Ibete, Miss Fe Mangahas, Miss Dr. Jenny Llaguno, our colleague in the PhilCuba working group, Princess Kadodong. Thank you all so much. We are looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Good night,
Good
night.
El día primero aquel, lleno de emoción y ruido, alguien dijo conmovido y feliz, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite, gracias Fidel. Y pusieron un cartel con la frase mencionada, repitiendo alborozada y feliz, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después de un año repite, gracias Fidel. Y el pueblo después...
Que este fenómeno de las mujeres en la revolución era una revolución dentro de otra revolución.
Una mujer de nuestro tiempo se ilumina desde el cantil de una criolla sin penumbra y de esas crisis que solo